Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Helpful Folks webinar, where we continue to bring you subject matter experts to cover the different aspects of what are really monumental changes taking place in the agricultural industry at the moment. Today's subject, you can see on your screen, is: does the future of your farm lie in natural capital? Please ask questions as we go along. To do that, you can see the icon on the top right hand side of your screen with the question mark. So click on that and please do, and if you've got any sort of questions for us. And if you're unable to stop with us for the whole of the webinar, it will be recorded and available to you, as are all the previous webinars if you've missed out on something in the past. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Alex Watts. Alex is a senior surveyor at Fisher German and recently joined the business's natural capital team and is one of the main architects of the green offset. So Alex, it's a real delight to have you with us this afternoon. This is a fascinating subject and I think we've all got something to learn for it. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ian, and good morning, everyone else. As Ian said, I work for Fisher German out of their Ashby-de-la-Zouch office in Leicestershire. For those that don't know, Fisher German are a firm of property consultants. We have around 650 employees now and work out of 25 different offices around England. I'm based in the property management and consultancy division, and as Ian touched on, I've been working on the natural capital team for the last 18 months. So this morning, or this afternoon, sorry, I'd like to talk to you about natural capital. I'd like to explain a bit more about the term natural capital, talk about the Environment Bill and the background around the policy and the things that it seeks to introduce. I'm going to explain more about the emerging opportunities within carbon, biodiversity net gain and nutrient offsetting. And then I'm going to introduce the platform that we at Fisher German have been working on called the Green Offset, which basically seeks to allow landowners to better understand these markets within natural capital. So what is natural capital? Natural capital is defined as elements of nature that directly or indirectly produce value to people. These include things like ecosystems, species, fresh water, land, minerals, and air and oceans. Natural capital defines approach taken to measure and account for the value that the environment provides to people and the economy, which has been overlooked by traditional approaches to economic assessment. By assigning value to the less obvious benefits of natural capital, they can be more easily incorporated into decision-making processes, leading to better management of our natural assets. The UK government's 25-year environment plan embeds the concept of natural capital at the heart of government policy making. And what is clear that this umbrella term of natural capital covers a range of environmental provisions, and it is a fast developing area creating emerging markets which has the potential to offer some opportunities for landowners. However, we will require a multidisciplinary approach to ensure that all of the implications of each and every scheme are carefully considered. So policy background, I thought it'd be useful to give you some background to the Environment Bill. It was reintroduced on the 30th of January 2020 following the general election, and it received royal assent back last week to become law. This bill sets out a clear trajectory to deliver more environmental outcomes in line with the requirement of the 25-year environmental strategy, with reduced funding for agriculture being replaced by funding for delivery of public services and increased private sector markets for ecosystem services. It is clear that we are entering into a period of significant change for rural land management, and with overlapping policy resulting in a complex picture made up of the Agricultural Bill, carbon targets and the Environment Bill. The Environment Bill seeks to introduce three key elements which will directly and indirectly impact land managers. These being legally binding targets for the improvement in priority areas of the environment, a duty to establish local nature recovery strategies, principle of biodiversity net gain to be applied via the planning system, As a result of this, we're seeing emerging markets for offsetting, providing opportunities to landowners, these being carbon offsetting, biodiversity net gain, and nutrient offsetting. Apologies, the slides were playing about them. So I thought it'd be useful to just have a quick look at the current worst offenders when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and how agriculture falls into this. So the agriculture business currently contributes circa 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. This looks quite bad, but when compared to travel at 27% and energy at 21%, it definitely is not one of the best out there, and we definitely need to work as an industry to try and improve that. In terms of other emissions other than carbon, circa 50% of all the methane emissions actually comes from livestock, and nitrate oxide, circa 30%, predominantly from nitrogen application. The NFU ambition for agriculture is to achieve net zero by 2040, and they'll do this by primarily focusing on improving farms' productive efficiency, improving land management and changing land use to try and capture more carbon, and boosting renewable energy and the wider bioeconomy. So all businesses, including agricultural ones, will now have to start looking at ways in which they can achieve net zero. A good starting point is to allow the business to help the business understand how they can reduce the carbon emissions, is to initially understand what their carbon footprint is. A carbon audit allows a business to understand their energy use, the costs, and thereby identify ways in which they can resource more efficiently, as well as understanding their carbon footprint. It identifies key areas to focus on carbon emission reductions and opportunities to sequestrate carbon. To complete a carbon audit, data is compiled from a number of parameters and then used to generate a figure for greenhouse gas emissions, either emitted or sequestrated. The unit used for carbon measurement is CO2e, carbon dioxide equivalent, a single measure to include the three main greenhouse gas emissions: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrate oxide. As you'd expect, certain parameters contribute considerably more than others. For example, crop inputs such as inorganic fertilizer emit a considerable amount of carbon when compared to other inputs. There are several benefits of completing a carbon audit. It allows the farm to benchmark its carbon position against previous years and other similar farming systems. It also allows farms to devise an action plan detailing management techniques to reduce carbon emissions. Excess carbon can then be identified and used to offset and provide additional income. We anticipate carbon emissions and sequestration will be part of the environmental land management schemes, otherwise known as ELMs, and possible financial incentives therefore may be available for reducing a farm's carbon footprint. There's also an opportunity to consider tree planting through the Woodland Carbon Code, as it's an up and running accredited scheme to enable trading of carbon units captured within woodlands, which I will come on to in a couple of slides' time. So carbon audit's key points. So once a business has completed a carbon audit, they can highlight the worst offending areas of their business and therefore identify what can be done to help reduce the emissions. We've highlighted some key ways in which a farm can help reduce their emissions. Firstly, fertiliser use, using less per tonne produced and lower carbon products, better use of cover crops, etc. Fuel use, more efficient engines, fewer cultivations, direct drilling where possible, which also sequestrates carbon in the soil. Power use, more efficient use of electricity and switching to renewable resources. Animal feeds, looking at the source of these and exploring the supply chain. And effective slurry and manure use, covered slurry, rapid incorporation, etc. And also reviewing the farm's pesticide use, all will help a farm try and reduce their carbon emissions. So carbon sequestration and offsetting. It is recognised that businesses can try and reduce their carbon emissions, but in order to achieve net zero, many will have to also sequester and offset their emissions. This is therefore driving a market for carbon offsetting and therefore offers some opportunity for farms as they are capable of delivering land which can deliver carbon offset. It is, however, worth noting that this is a voluntary market at the moment, and it's unregulated, and currently no government policy requires offsetting. We recognise, however, that you will need to understand your own emission first. You might need carbon sequestration yourself to achieve your own business objectives. And it's also currently a very emerging market, and we're not sure whether they're valuing carbon correctly and how much carbon credits will be worth in the future. And these are all questions that will need to be carefully considered when trying to establish whether carbon offsetting is for you. Remember, carbon reduction is a hierarchy. Firstly, avoid, secondly, reduce, and thirdly, offset. So the carbon credit market, the public market. The government purchased carbon through the Woodland Carbon Guarantee Scheme. There's circa £500 million worth of funding. It's a reverse auction which is held twice a year, and the seller needs to calculate what the minimum value they are willing to accept. It's verified through the Woodland Carbon Code and provides a minimum buyout price for carbon, which can utilise they can also utilise woodland carbon creation grants, and if the market improves, carbon can be sold elsewhere. What we are seeing, however, is the price currently being paid in these markets is relatively low and not thought to be enough to incentivise landowners to plant large swathes of the land up with trees, particularly given the cost of verification and maintenance. But we're expecting this to change. For example, the carbon private market we're seeing to be quite slightly more lucrative. What we're seeing is that there's a demand from corporate companies, private individuals who are looking for sites which are local to their businesses where they can offset their carbon emissions, and they're willing to pay more for this. This is starting to grow as more and more businesses set their own net zero targets and look for areas to deliver offsets. It is worth noting, however, that this is a voluntary market and is not currently regulated. We're also seeing a growing demand for low-grade arable land from companies who are looking to purchase land to do their own carbon offsetting. So land which is currently not worth that much because it's not very good for arable crop cultivation, for example, is actually reaching much higher values than it would have done historically because of its potential use to be used for delivering a carbon offset. It's also worth noting that woodland delivers more than just carbon benefits, and there is potential for stacking income streams. Can it also deliver biodiversity net gain? Can soil carbon also be taken into account? These are all questions which will need to be answered in due course. So biodiversity net gain. Biodiversity net gain aims to leave biodiversity in a measurably better place than before the development took place. Enshrined within the Environment Bill, a 10% biodiversity net gain will become a condition of all planning permissions granted. It is expected to apply to all scales of development with approval of biodiversity net gain plan for consent. The net gain must be delivered for at least 30 years and potentially in perpetuity, as it is likely to develop into a broader environmental net gain in the long term. Biodiversity already is being applied through the planning systems in some local authorities, including Warwickshire, Oxfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Hampshire, and others. This is helping to create a market for biodiversity offsetting and opportunities for landowners to derive a new income for delivery of habitat. Now, I note that it's only in some local authorities, but as I've spoken about earlier in this talk, the Environment Bill is now law, so it's only a matter of time before all local planning authorities will be forced to adopt this, but it is likely to be through secondary legislation, and it will be required through that mechanism that all local planning authorities will have to work out their own way in which they will deliver and require biodiversity net gain from planning permissions. So biodiversity net gain, how is it measured? The Natural England Biodiversity Metric 3.0 provides a tool for measuring biodiversity value. It enables assessment and measurement of biodiversity on a habitat basis. It calculates biodiversity in terms of habitat units, allowing different types of habitat to be assessed for their quality and significance and to provide a comparable output. The biodiversity units are ascertained by calculations of the following: habitat area multiplied by condition and distinctiveness of habitat, multiplied by spatial position, multiplied by time and delivery. The metric gives significance to not only just the scale and quality of the habitat, but where it is in relation to other habitat types. This means that two otherwise identical areas of land could have significant difference in habitat values depending on the habitat itself and the surrounding areas. Land with a high level of connectiveness could deliver more habitat units per area. It is thought likely that local nature recovery strategies will play a role in identifying priority areas for habitat creation, but again, we will have to wait for that secondary legislation for this to come into play. So biodiversity net gain, what does it mean to landowners? So those with development land will need to consider the impact on the development value and how biodiversity value can be retained within the wider estate. There is opportunity for provision of offset credits from more marginal land, which will allow landowners to derive long-term incomes. However, it is likely that the agreements needed to deliver biodiversity net gain will be complex and long-term and will require a number of considerations. Below, I'm going to talk through a few, but there will also need to be more on top of that. So impact on capital value of the land versus income. So there's likely to be a capital devaluation on the basis that whatever biodiversity net gain you're seeking to achieve, it's likely to be worth less in terms of capital value for the land when compared to an arable land value, which is what the land is likely to be prior to that biodiversity net gain being adopted. Tax implications. Can the land still be considered as agricultural land? Therefore, in the short term, can you receive a basic payment scheme for this? And are you being seen as actively farming it and therefore able to claim APR relief? Payment structure. Biodiversity net gain will likely need to be delivered for a minimum of 30 years. So how will the delivery of that in terms of the financial incentive be delivered? Will it be in a lump sum upfront, or will it be over an annual income? How will funds be held to satisfy local authorities? The developer will inevitably need to do biodiversity net gain, and it will be delivered as it will be a requirement which will work like a Section 106 agreement. So inevitably, the developer will need to make sure that they are abiding by any local planning authorities' requirements. The landlord and tenant relationships. Obviously, if the land is tenanted and you are delivering biodiversity net gain on it, the tenant's occupation will need to be taken into account. How their rent is paid, whether they receive a rent reduction, whether it's completely removed from the tenancy. They're all things that will need to be thought about. Will habitat be created in perpetuity? Now, this is something I'm asked a lot. Inevitably, if you are creating a habitat for 30 years, I don't know what will happen in 30 years, but it is unlikely that Natural England will allow you to then go in and plough that area up or do other diversification opportunities on that area. On the basis that it's been established for 30 years, it's likely that some other form of accreditation will then be put on that land, something like a SSSI is thought, but obviously we are not sure yet, and Natural England have yet to pass comment on this. And how does the offsetting interact on agricultural ELMS payments? And not only that, but the wider farm holding and the wider activities on the farm. All of this will need to be considered before entering into any form of biodiversity net gain. So nutrient offsetting is nutrient offsetting in the form of phosphates and nitrates. This is a growing issue for development in sensitive catchments within 32 local planning areas impacted to some degrees. Developers in affected areas will need to demonstrate how their development will ensure nutrient neutrality before it can be consented or conditions discharged. This follows the Court of Justice of European Union judgment in 2018, which prevents development that would result in deterioration of special area and conservation. It is unclear how it will be resolved yet, but it's already holding up a number of housing developments in different areas. It's got the potential to offer opportunities around creation of wetlands adjacent to sewage treatment works to reduce phosphate output. and other measures which will help reduce phosphates. There is therefore potential for landowners to generate credits for phosphate or nitrate offsetting. Again, there's a lot of questions around how these will be valued, what they will be worth, and how they'll be traded, and who will inevitably be responsible for the creation and management of said credits and wetlands. All of these will need to be carefully clarified and considered before landowners are recommended to enter these sorts of opportunities. So with all this in mind, Fisher German over the last year or so have been working on a new initiative which we've called the Green Offset. When we initially started looking at this, it was purely from a position of biodiversity net gain, as we could see the opportunity that the Environment Bill will bring to our landowning clients in terms of providing land for offsets. We quickly, however, came to realise that the opportunities under the natural capital umbrella, as I've touched on this morning, span much wider than purely biodiversity offsetting. And with the wider knowledge within our existing business on carbon, water, etc., it seemed a waste not to create a platform which could act as a one-stop shop for all things natural capital. So the platform seeks to therefore connect landowners, known as offset providers, with any party who is seeking an offset, aptly known as offset seekers, whether that be corporate companies looking to sequestrate carbon, or a developer looking to achieve their own biodiversity net gain, or a utility company looking to also achieve their own natural capital targets. So there's currently no other system on the market which offers this type of service, and with our existing client base, we recognise a huge business opportunity to launch a platform which can act as a matching service for willing individuals. For offset providers, the system is entirely free to use. They simply register their land and they can be made aware of any opportunities which are out there without committing them to anything. For offset seekers, it offers a quick and efficient way of locating land with potential for siting of an offset and allows introduction to be made with willing landowners. So to allow you to get a better understanding of how the platform looks and works, I thought I would share a few screenshots with you today of the website. If you would like to go on and have a look in your own time, if you just type Green Offset into Google, then it will come up. So this is the home page. We wanted to keep it looking quite simple and clean. You'll see that we have a count of the current land registered on there. This will calculate every time you log on. The platform was made live in June of this year, and we already have over 29,000 hectares registered on the platform by offset providers who are interested in knowing about more natural capital scheme opportunities that might be out there. So again, this is the search page on the website. So anyone who goes on the website can search a location to see what land is registered in the vicinity of the location. So I'm based in the Ashby office, so I did a search of the radius within the 25-mile radius of the Ashby office. The parcels are shown as a pinpoint, and we have deliberately used a pin to try and protect the anonymity of the landowner. The zoom function is also reduced to a 5-mile radius to try and stop people circumnavigating the website and downloading the land registry titles themselves. The offset seeker can tick on the parcels which they would like to inquire about. They, like providers, have to complete a simple form and sign T's and C's. So the green one selected, the seeker can select multiple parcels. So in this example, I've selected 3 in the middle there, and they've turned green. So once the inquiry is received for the land in question, the Green Offset team will revert back to the provider, so revert back to the landowner to notify them of the interest. So we've added an extra layer of filter here to sort of put the control with the landowner. So at this point, we'll ask the landowner to confirm if they're happy for their details to be shared with third party. We'll give them some more information so that they can understand exactly what the interest is. At that point, if they don't wish that to happen, if they don't like the idea of the offset, or if they don't like the seeker themselves, they can refuse for their details to be passed on and nothing further will happen. Equally, if they would like to know a bit more and have an open conversation with the offset seeker, then their details will be passed on, and that will allow them to have a conversation. Again, keeping the control with the offset provider being the landowner. So at this point, the role of the Green Offset ends. However, this is when existing agents, potentially us, can step in and be instructed by the provider to act on their behalf in negotiating and brokering a deal between parties. Hopefully this has given you a bit of a better idea of how the platform works. But again, feel free to go on and have a look in your own time, and you can always revert back to me if you have any queries. So why have we done this? Why have we invested time and money in building a platform? Well, our main reason was to help try and create a marketplace for natural capital schemes, as there's currently not one out there. It allows both our clients and potential clients and other people's clients to register their land completely freely of charge, and it allows them a simple way to understand any opportunities which might be out there without committing to anything, as it's still recognised that a lot of these markets are emerging. As Fisher German, through the green offset, we can be made aware of the commercial terms which are being agreed, which will give us a better understanding of how these markets are developing and what values are being paid. All of the above will then help us better advise our clients. Now, conversely, we would like our competitors to use this tool. We would like them to register their clients' land, because inevitably, all it will do is win them a job in due course. So if their landowning client receives an inquiry through the green offset, then we would revert back to them in the first instance, and then they can maybe win an instruction in advising their client in due course on an offset deal which might be on the table through the green offset. So next steps, get your land registered. There's really no disadvantage to doing so. I would challenge anyone to find one, and it's entirely free, and the land can be deleted at any time if intentions for that land change. If you would like to do more than just register the land and then just register the land and see if any interest comes way, then we can offer a number of other services which can help better understand exactly what your land can offer from a natural capital perspective. We're currently encouraging our clients to look more cohesively at the entire estate and review where they have a bit of poor arable land, which might therefore be suitable for delivering biodiversity net gain, or equally where they would like to see some tree planting, perhaps an area of their land could do with screening, so that when an opportunity comes their way, they can be more prepared for knowing where they might like to see these types of schemes on their land. We can also assist in instruction of a baseline environmental survey. What this will do is allow landowners to understand what their current baseline is from a habitat value point of view, and then it will allow them to understand exactly what gain can be delivered if they are approached by a developer who is looking to achieve biodiversity net gain on their land. I spoke quite a lot about carbon audits. Our agribusiness team are also doing a lot on carbon audits to help our farming businesses understand their current carbon impact and footprints. So again, if that would be of interest, we can help in due course. So that's all I wanted to say today. I am conscious that there might be a few questions which I will be happy to answer now. I think Ian's going to filter them through to me.
Thank you, Alex. That was a very comprehensive overview. Thank you very much. Yeah, just a few questions that have come in. Just go looking at the carbon audit. If I'm an organic farmer, am I in a more advantageous position to benefit from this?
Potentially, yes. From a tree planting point of view, probably not, because what an organic farmer does, what the practices through organic farming will allow the soil carbon to be better retained. So in terms of tree planting, the opportunities which are out there are probably similar, on the basis that it will depend what type of land type you have and whether it's suitable for tree planting. You know, if you've got grade 1 arable land, we wouldn't recommend that you plant it up with trees, but equally, if you've got marginal arable land, which whether it's organically or inorganically farmed isn't capable of delivering sort of higher returns, then it might be worth looking at whether you can plant that up with trees. Soil carbon is not really reaching a point where we can safely advise on it, in the point that it's really struggling with the accreditation point of view. The measurements and the accreditation tools aren't there yet. like they are with woodland, which is why people are relying more on the woodland carbon code, because it's a safely accredited system which allows landowners and people who are looking to offset carbon alike understand those units. Yes, the price is quite low at the moment, but it's providing a government-led accreditation, whereas that's not there with soil carbon yet. That's not to say it won't come, but it's worth noting that organic farmers will inevitably have more soil carbon retained, but when and if that is able to be sold is yet to be confirmed.
Okay. Well, partly related to that and to elms really. So if I'm going into if I'm looking at the say, let's look at the arable standard for elms, and as part of that, I've got to put a percentage of my ground into a green crop, overwintering green crop cover. So am I by doing that then? Am I basically increasing my my ability then to store more carbon? Is there a relationship between, if I went 50% a green crop cover, is that giving me an advantage or what or not?
It's an interesting question. You're not creating a disadvantage because ultimately you're going to be paid for doing that elm scheme. So, but what we're advising clients to be very careful of is you won't be able to receive double funding. So you won't be able to enter into a government-led scheme like elms and be paid to create a green crop, and then also be paid by a developer to deliver biodiversity net gain. That will be seen as double funding, and so we don't think that that is possible. As I've said with a number of points, unfortunately the legislation isn't there yet, and Natural England or the government haven't actually said double funding will not be allowed in that form. But I think it's inevitable if you're being paid by the government to deliver an environmental gain. It's unlikely that you'll also be able to get funding from a developer to do that. What we're advising clients at the moment in terms of elms, countryside stewardship, any environmental schemes which are out there, we're certainly saying to clients, embrace them, adopt them, run with them, because if they work with the wider farm holding and they generate a good income for the landowner, then it's certainly worth exploring in the short term. If any sort of opportunity in terms of carbon offsetting or biodiversity net gain or phosphate and nitrate offsetting comes along, then that opportunity can be reviewed in isolation. And if it's worth delivering that on behalf of a developer or a corporate company, whoever it might be, then the loss of the countryside stewardship funding will need to be taken into account and then compensated from the developer. So if you're saying, okay, I've entered into this countryside stewardship scheme, which you can get out of in the middle of the scheme, you just have to pay a penalty for that, we would recommend that then you would make sure that that forms part of the compensation being paid by the developer for you to then deliver that biodiversity net gain. What's worth considering though is things like countryside stewardship, elms, they're short-term schemes they'll be able to be got out of. Things like biodiversity net gain, they won't be able to be get out of. They will, the way in which we see the agreements being formatted is as an environmental covenant. So it will run like a restrictive covenant on the land. So the likelihood of you then getting out of it is going to be very difficult.
Okay, you mentioned countryside stewardship there, and there's a question relating to that. Is if I'm currently in a mid-tier, high-tier stewardship, am I disadvantaging myself from what might come with biodiversity net gain? And am I doing, if you like, too much already to give me room to benefit from what might come available later on?
The easy answer is probably yes, in the way that by entering in your land into a scheme like countryside stewardship, what you're doing is you're taking money from the government to improve the ecological habitat value of that area of land, which will in turn increase the baseline environmental score of that land. So from a biodiversity net gain point of view, that will be disadvantageous because it will mean that as a developer coming along looking to deliver biodiversity net gain on the land, what they will want to do is take a low value piece of land in terms of biodiversity. So a piece of arable land, for example, which hasn't had any sort of improvement from an ecology point of view, and deliver a gain and enter it into a change of use, which will allow them to derive a gain from an ecological point of view. So if you think a sort of bare bit of arable ground, that will be scoring much lower from a biodiversity point of view than a wildflower meadow, which is already within countryside stewardship. That being said, there are gains which can still be delivered. They're just harder to grasp in that scenario. But then equally, there may be other areas of the farm which are better placed to deliver that gain. And equally, there might be other countryside stewardship type schemes through ELMS, which might be more advantageous and less restrictive than biodiversity net gain. So as we're saying with all our clients at the moment, these markets are very emerging, and as opportunities come to light, that's when you have to look at the farm from a sort of cohesive point of view and think, is this opportunity going to work for us for the entire holding? How does it work when you look at countryside stewardship? How does it work when you look at, you know, the other opportunities which are coming through ELMS? And it might not work, and we totally appreciate that these types of schemes might not work for landowners, but as they're facing the loss of the basic payment scheme, they need to be made of as many opportunities which can help diversify their income streams as possible. So something like the green offset is only going to help them do that, even if every opportunity that comes to light they actually turn down because they won't work on their holding. It's still worth being made aware of those opportunities which might be out there. Okay.
You're mentioning landowners there. You did a short piece on landowner-tenant relationships. If I'm a landowner now, reviewing or about renewing or about to give a 10-year FBT, do I need to be protecting myself in any way? I mean, you're using 30 years as a time span quite a lot during your talk. If you know, do you expect to see things happening within the next 10 years, which as a landowner I should be protecting my rights?
Certainly. I mean, 30 years is because that's what the planning system is going to expect the developer to deliver for an absolute minimum. But as I alluded to in the talk, it's likely to span much beyond 30 years because of the fact that you're creating a habitat, and it's unlikely that Natural England will therefore allow you to do whatever you want to the land without some form of sort of permission once that 30-year term is up. So certainly, and as I've already said, these schemes, biodiversity net gain, are already very present in areas like Warwickshire, for example, where the council have actually adopted biodiversity net gain since 2014. They were one of the first pilot studies within the council area which adopted biodiversity net gain as a principle as part of their planning system. So they are already very au fait with the delivery of biodiversity net gain, and a number of landowners in those areas have therefore actually started banking credits to deliver biodiversity net gain quicker for developers who are in that area being forced to achieve a biodiversity net gain, even when it's not mandate for the rest of the country. In terms of landlord and tenant, it's certainly something that we are making our clients aware of, and putting clauses within agreements to make sure that if the landowner has an opportunity for biodiversity net gain, land can be potentially removed from the tenancy demise to deliver that. Now, it depends what biodiversity net gain you're delivering. If it is, for example, for grass and habitat establishment, then the tenant may be able to continue to farm that land, take a cut, for example, graze it for on a low density basis. So it could still actively be farmed, and therefore it might be in the landlord's interest to have the tenant do that on their behalf, as they've got someone there that's capable of doing it. But how it will work in terms of, therefore, the rent that the tenant's paying will all be subject to negotiation between the landlord and the tenant. But certainly we're currently looking at our tenancy agreements and working out ways in which we can protect the landowner to make sure that if an opportunity comes along, there are suitable clauses in there which would allow them to properly consider them, even if a tenant's in place.
Okay, Alex, we're working hard with these questions, I know, but there's one I just want to finish off on, and that is, right, so what do? I'm a practical farmer. I'm sitting here. I've listened to your presentation. I can see one thing I can do is register with you and find out what could be available in the area. What else can I do? Give me another couple of things that I say sitting here now I can do, which will, if you like, help my knowledge or help me determine my baseline to move on.
Yeah, certainly. So we are currently encouraging our clients to do sort of a high level estate review. So what that means is they look more cohesively at the estate as a whole, and they identify areas which probably long term might come for development, whether that be industrial, housing, or whatever it might be. And therefore, if they have got potential for development, where have they therefore got potential to deliver biodiversity net gain on their estate? So for landowners with a lot of land and who have development potential, it's very much recommended that they therefore deliver that biodiversity net gain on site and don't have to therefore pay either a developer contribution to the council to deliver or pay a third party landowner to deliver that biodiversity net gain. So it's all about trying to get landowners to start having these thought processes about the land holding and look where they might be best placed to plant some trees, where might they want to see some tree planting schemes, and try and have those thought processes so that if an opportunity comes along, they've had those. Equally, if the landowner is very proactive, they might like to complete a baseline ecological survey. This will allow them to understand the baseline and therefore understand the areas of land which would be best placed to achieve a biodiversity net gain. So where you've got either intensively farmed grassland or arable land where the score is already quite low, so it's capable of delivering a gain. And equally, as I touched on earlier in the talk, carbon audits. It's all well and good. A lot of people are seeing, carbon offsetting and selling carbon units and planting lots of trees. But if you don't already know what your carbon score is and your carbon footprint is, if you sell all your carbon units and then find in 10 years' time that you're actually a serious carbon emitter and you now need to sequestrate some carbon, but you've sold it all for a price that you now can't, you're now going to have to buy back the carbon at a higher price that you sold it at. That's going to be a really nasty place to be. Now, landowners hold a massive opportunity here because at the end of the day, they hold the land, they hold the capability to sequestrate carbon, but they need to be really careful to not jump on the bandwagon too early, plant all these trees, sell all the credits, and then get to a point later down the line where they're being told as a business they need to achieve net zero. And if not, they'll have all these tax implications. And then they look at their pot of carbon offsets and they realise that they sold all their units 5 years ago for a price that is way below what it is in 10 years' time. So, and it's a really difficult one because we don't know where the markets are going to go, which is again why we've done the green offset, to try and help these markets establish and flow so that we can better understand the values that are being paid and then ultimately advise our clients better.
Thank you, Alex.
Ian, I might just jump in for a minute, actually, just to draw your attention to a couple of new questions that have come in on the Q&A panel.
Okay.
Can you see those?
No, I can't.
Okay, I'll read them out. Can you see them?
Okay, no, you have to read them out. They've not come through to me.
Okay, Alex, we've got a few more questions that have come in. The first one is, can pre-existing woodland be included?
Sadly not. I think it's ridiculous that the government haven't passed any comment on this at the moment. We all know that there's thousands of acres of woodland out there that has been affected by disease, is being poorly mismanaged or not managed at all. And in terms of the capabilities of from a carbon perspective, there's a lot of opportunity there. But at the moment, all the grants, all the woodland carbon code scheme is only for new woodland. So it's not being, they're lobbying the government currently to try and get them to consider existing woodland, but at the moment the answer is no.
Okay, thank you. Next question, is there a minimum for the area of land to be registered?
No, none at all. So at the moment, we're just currently encouraging our clients to register their whole farm, because the way the platform works is done by land registry title information. So not that that's ever shown as useful on the search. The only thing that's shown is the schemes of which the landowner has chosen to sign up to and a PIN. But how it works is it's registered on a title basis. So you either type in the title number or you go on the search and you click on the title itself. And so there's no restriction on what can be registered. Ultimately, we made this tried to make it as easy as possible for landowners to register their land. We haven't required them to complete baseline environmental surveys or anything like that at this point, because we spoke to developers, we spoke to seekers, and the main sort of stumbling block and issue for them was just talking to landowners and having that contact. You know, we all know that landowners don't like to be cold called and knocked on their door by random strangers who want to, you know, inquire about their land for something. So this platform allows them to, you know, an opportunity to speak to landowners, and it doesn't guarantee anything, but it allows them to have an open conversation potentially about what the opportunity might be and how it might work. So no, there is no restriction on what could be registered and how much.
Okay, great. And then I think you've probably answered this one, but it's worth just recapping, which is, you mentioned low-grade arable land. Can low-grade grassland be entered in the schemes, please?
Yeah, definitely. So if it's arable to grassland conversion is quite high scoring, because obviously arable is quite low scoring. So to do that game, but actually intensively farmed grassland is nearly as good, because if you're taking an intensively farmed grassland area and making it low intensity, where you're only taking potentially one cut, you're only grazing it with a few animals at certain times of the year, for example, then the score that you can improve it by is also quite high. So yeah, there's no restriction in terms of land type which can be registered. And as I've said, it's all subject to negotiation and subject to the estate review, where the landowner's got an area which they think could be capable of delivering biodiversity net gain. At the end of the day, the only restriction is I would not recommend that you deliver biodiversity net gain on any area of land which could have the potential to do something else in terms of diversification, for example, housing development or something like that, because as I've alluded to, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to remove that environmental covenant even after that 30-year term is expired.
Okay, and then last one, good question here. Are you aware of any training courses for landowners on biodiversity net gain, etc.?
I'm not aware of any training courses. As a business, we've been doing quite a lot of webinars to try and help clients understand. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to get hold of me. I think if I click again, Barry, and our contact come back. I'm still sharing. I'm not sure it's working for me anymore.
Yes, you're still sharing.
There you go. So feel free to get in touch if you're wanting some more information. But there is a lot of webinars, reading about natural capital and biodiversity net gain out there at the moment, because it is quite a hot topic, particularly as the Environment Bill just received royal assent. So do some Googling, have a look. If you want some more information, let me know. But there is a lot, there's almost too much, I would say. Natural England is also a very good starting point, because obviously they are going to be very influential. They've drafted the biodiversity metric, which will act as a calculator for all biodiversity net gain. So they're also a good starting point.
Okay, is that your last one, Varian?
Yep, that was the last one.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you, Varian. Alex, yeah, we're really grateful to you for this morning. You've made things. Yeah, there's still a lot to take in, but you've given us a very clear indication of the course of travel and what are the various and some of the pitfalls, I think, that we've got to we've got to look out for. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. There's the expert contact details there, and I'm sure Alex would be very pleased to answer any further questions, especially relating to the green offset. On behalf of folk to folk, thank you for joining us. We do appreciate at folk to folk that for some farms there will be need to have some capital investment to make the most of things and various other parts of ELMS that we're going to have to comply with. We do have funds available to help rural businesses, and this morning there was a major announcement that the British Business Investment Bank are channeling £7 million worth of funding through folk to folk to help rural businesses across the country. So again, any contacts on that, please either contact me or contact the office. Thank you again, Alex. Been a pleasure to have you with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and a very good day.
Thanks all. Thank you.